guns, and money. Send lawyers, guns, and money.
Welcome, everyone, to a special episode of Conduct Detrimental, episode 71. This is Dan Lust. You will recognize my voice, but joining me tonight is not Dan Wallach. We have Mike Lawson, social media guru extraordinaire who runs the Conduct Detrimental account. You will remember Mike joined our podcast maybe 10 episodes ago, and he was in the middle of bar prep. And Mike has some special news. So, Mike, I'll let you tell everybody what the special news might be.
Thanks, Dan. It's nice to be here. I am the voice behind the funny GIFs and back and forth that we have on Twitter. And I had some exciting news that I passed the bar, the New York State bar exam. So before we had the episode where I was talking about my experience, and now today the news came out, I successfully have passed the New York State bar exam.
It is a big thing, but Mike, listen, you obviously had a lot of hard questions on the test. Fortunately, they didn't ask you how to pronunciate the word GIF because you just failed that part of the exam.
GIF is peanut butter. GIF is the picture.
Yeah, no,
we can fight about that.
I mean, it's not. I had a friend who will remain nameless. I'm not sure if he's listening to this, but he thought the word meme was pronounced mimi. And this was like very recently. So you never know. You never know. So Mike, big congrats to you. Dan is on a very important assignment. So we thought of all things, it was a good night to get you back in the mix. So that said, we have a lot of sports law news in the past week or so. We have kind of a loaded docket. So I guess we can kind of jump right into the roadmap, Mike, and we'll go we'll say in order of social media importance. Number one, we're going to talk about the James Harden impending breach in the overall situation. From Harden traveling coast to coast from Atlanta to Vegas, breaking NBA COVID protocol, demanding a trade from the Rockets, and then, I obviously I had some fun with it, but the photo of James Harden on social media looking like he was very much out of shape. Obviously those are all elements that could be involved in a breach of his contract. So we're going to talk about that and, where that goes from there on the basketball level. Number two, really the big news that happened today. We're recording this on Wednesday, December 16th. The United States Supreme Court has announced that they're going to have a sports law case. And Mike's going to get into that. Mike, you wrote a note on the case, on the Olsen case?
A little research paper for one of my externships.
Little research paper for one of his externships. Like, okay, not everybody writes research papers for their externship, so it's kind of a big deal. So we'll get into that. Mike is the other reason that Mike's on today. Supreme Court is obviously going to be talking and really ruling on antitrust law for college sports. So something that everyone needs to be paying attention to as much as they're paying attention to just the normal name, image, and likeness issue. Number three, we spent a lot of time on this podcast over the summer talking about the Washington football team. Now we have the Cleveland baseball team, the Cleveland Indians no more. They've announced the name change. It's a matter of what it is. So we'll get into that. Trademark issues. Number four, we're going to talk a little bit about boxing. We're going to talk about Logan Paul, Jake Paul, a little Floyd Mayweather, a little Conor McGregor, talk about the negotiations going on there. And number five, last but not least, so unfortunately we don't have Dan here to talk about this, but the New York Rangers, we get some hockey news. We're going to mix it up a little bit. Mark Messier involved in a lawsuit with, of all things, a failed cannabis adventure. So, interesting. We got a lot of interesting topics. So, Mike, that said, let us start in the world of the National Basketball Association, James Harden. For those that maybe are not as familiar with James Harden is, I want to say, like the Dan Marino of the NBA. He's got all the points. He's getting all, they made the team really around him. So Harden used to be part of the Big Three in Oklahoma City with Durant and Russell Westbrook.
Sixth man of the year.
Sixth man of the year. I think he was the third overall pick. I think he went to Arizona State. He used to have this kind of have like a little weird face, but then he got the beard in. Now he's the beard, and now he's a big deal in Houston. So over the years, they've really built a team around him in Houston, literally listening to trade demands that he wanted about bringing players in. So Houston seems to be a team on the decline. So even though Harden has 3 years left on his contract, he's demanded a trade. He's announced that he'd be willing to go to the 76ers for a reunion with his old GM, Daryl Morey. He's willing to go to the Bucks to play with Giannis, even though those guys have their own storied history between them. But it's basically a player who is saying, hey, I want out, but he's under contract for 3 more years. So we can get into the nuances, which we will. But Mike, let me just toss it to you on this. We've never really seen a superstar be held in breach of contract for demanding a trade. But this is not like an Anthony Davis situation where there's a rental player, right? There's 1 year left in his contract. This is a guy with 3 years left. What do you think the Harden situations differs from what we've seen in years past with superstars demanding a trade out of town?
Oh, gosh. If we're sticking to the NBA with demanding trades, you've got to go back to I think the generation that maybe LeBron started. I mean, you've got the whole NBA now is built around, I want to go somewhere where I can win. And I think that's now either demanding a trade or having a free agency where there's this big decision about where they're supposed to go. And then you have the issues of like Durant going to the team that he lost to in the playoffs before and the fights with that. You have the decision with ESPN and LeBron going to Miami and then going back to Cleveland. I mean, there's just it's a new generation of basketball players. I mean, social media doesn't help. I feel like this would have made things worse if this was back in the Jordan era or even earlier. But I think Harden has really stuck himself into this. He's a niche basketball player where he is the step back king, right? He's created this, travel, if you will, step back 3-pointer. And he's made himself into this great player coming out of Oklahoma City, where if he had stayed there, maybe Oklahoma would have been a powerhouse, and they kind of fell apart. Ends up in Houston. He runs the show in Houston. They actually gained some good players. Clint Capella was one of the best big men. Now Westbrook came in, Westbrook's out. I mean, Chris Paul is one of probably the greatest point guards of this generation of the 2000s, and he came in.
I think you just said point guard. I feel like you meant to say point god, but keep going.
Point guard, exactly. So you have Harden now, where he's built the team around him, then he's lost the team around him. I mean, I think he's right to demand a trade. I mean, there's just about nothing that he can do with Houston now. And I think if we're going to start talking about predictions, because Dan Wallach is the god of predictions on this show, I'm going to say he's going to end up in Milwaukee. That is my prediction. And I say, him and Giannis, I can see the tension that there is, but that's where he's going to go.
So I heard a fun story. So we've talked about this in the podcast. I love listening to the NBA Ringer show. I think it's great. There's a show called The Mismatch. I didn't realize there was such a history between them, but I guess it goes back. Giannis was the captain of the All-Star team. He didn't draft Harden, and he basically said that their strategy on the All-Star team was to give the ball to whoever James Harden was guarding, which is not really not a very subtle shot. So they definitely have a history. So Mike, I'll take the odds that they're not. He's not going to go to Milwaukee anytime soon, especially it's not on the docket, but with Giannis signing that monster contract, they are basically giving him the keys to the franchise. So, but yeah, I mean, I think on the legal level with Harden, you kind of have to keep in mind, and I kind of, made light of this on social media, but like, James Harden, the uniform player contract, we don't know what the actual specifics of Harden's contract say, but he has to give his best efforts to the team. There's no clause that actually says best efforts, but he has to keep himself in good physical condition. There's a clause which is not going to come into play here by any means, but it came up in the Dion Waiters situation last year. Paragraph 16 of the uniform player contract basically says the team may terminate this contract upon written notice to the player if at any time the player shall fail, refuse, or neglect to conform his personal conduct to standards of good citizenship, good moral character, and good sportsmanship, defined here to mean not engaging in acts of moral turpitude. So, I'm not obviously by any means inclining that Harden's doing anything illicit, but there have been players in the history of sports, Terrell Owens being one that I grew up with, where he was fined for conduct detrimental to the team. He was not, I'm saying the name of the podcast, Mike. If we had a sound effect, it would go off.
Put a quarter in.
Yeah, that's not a bad thing to say the name of the podcast. That's a good thing. We could just, name brand. But I think Harden is sending very, very thinly veiled signals that he wants out of town, that he's going to make their life very difficult. And I mentioned this, there was a period of time, I think it was the last week of November, heading into December, where NBA players had to basically self-quarantine and not leave their home unless it was something absolutely essential. So dropping the kids off at school, going to the grocery store, that's what NBA protocol entailed. Meanwhile, James Harden is it's not paparazzi. James Harden is posting to his own Instagram that he's out with, little baby at a party, and, they're at a club without masks. So, again, whatever you think about the virus is one thing. Those are the NBA rules. The NBA rules say you can't do that. So for Harden to return to camp, he just played in his first action. Harden was required to get 6 negative tests back to back. I think that was the right amount of backs. But that's, and he came to camp, and I made fun of the picture. I think social media had a lot of fun with it. But Harden, maybe he's not doesn't look exactly like Rick Ross, but he's a little bigger than he normally looks. And you can't tell me that that's a guy that's been the peak physical condition at this point. So, yeah, I think he's trending towards an area where maybe he's not necessarily a breach, Mike, but he's showing that he's going to be difficult in a locker room. And if Mike, if you're the Philadelphia 76ers, and there's been reports that a trade for Ben Simmons has been offered, Ben Simmons and 3 first-round draft picks in exchange for, Harden. If I'm the Sixers, maybe I'd consider that deal a little bit more if Harden's not out here being very difficult. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, do you think there's any chance, Mike, that the NBA steps in here and maybe says that there should be some type of punishment for a player giving the wrong type of message?
Before I make a comment about the Sixers thing, if you think about the NBA, their whole setup with the NBA bubble was just to protect the sport. No fans, everybody played in the same arena, nobody's allowed to leave. And there was issues with that where there were apparently players leaving the bubble or sneaking people in. You guys talked about that on previous episodes. So the NBA is very strict on a lot of these rules, and just because it's the off season now, maybe Harden thinks he can get away with it. I don't know. Posting on social media, maybe that's just a Freudian slip of his Twitter hands while he's, I don't know, maybe a little inebriated.
So that was by accident. Oh, understood.
Exactly.
You're right.
Unintentionally intentional, maybe. I mean, he's clearly showing a lot of detrimental conduct to the team by showing that he doesn't want to be with them. Now, as a 76er fan, if he wants to come to the Sixers, I don't know. I wouldn't take the trade with Ben Simmons. I mean, the Sixers have been trusting the process for God knows how long. I mean, you got to just trust it until it dies. That's the Philly way. But I think with the way that Harden is trending, yeah, I can totally see some sort of NBA action. I mean, Adam Silver might step in and say, you need to shape up here because we're going to get back into this bubble. And if you're going to do these things that are not just detrimental to the Rockets' health and safety, but now everybody that you play against, now you're getting into a Rudy Gobert situation where he's touching all the mics during a press conference, even though that was in jest, but he ended up actually having COVID. So if you look at it that way, Harden's being a lot more, I don't want to say deviant, but he's being a lot more, risky to just the general safety of the NBA. So, I mean, yes, I could totally see the NBA stepping in.
Okay, so I guess twofold. I don't think we could compare him to Rudy Gobert, who, Rudy Gobert, at least March 11th, we didn't know what COVID was. It was all kind of fun and games. But yeah, I think the reason I bring up NBA stepping in, and then we'll move on. But the point is the Rockets can't find him for doing what he's doing. And again, like let me take a step back. Harden last night looked pretty good. So let's see, maybe that's Harden. Maybe the clock is ticking. Maybe he goes, I'm going to show up well in the preseason, but I want to be traded before the season starts. So I do think this is a ticking time bomb situation. But the reason that the NBA may need to step in, and at least as has been reported, teams were telling the NBA to step in because it was a blatant violation of COVID protocol, which you can't have. So yeah, I mean, there's been a report that Harden is, at least at one point, was using a plane to fly to Vegas between night games, a private jet. So we'll see what Harden does. We'll see if I just don't think he can get away with that in this founding year in Houston. So let us transition, Mike, to the big story of today on Wednesday, again, December 16th. Supreme Court of the United States, for the first time, Mike, in 3 decades, is addressing the law of college sports. So this is a very, very big deal. I don't think people may have understood this. We talk about whether issues will go up to the Supreme Court a lot. And in law school, whoever takes con law, we talk all about cases that reach the Supreme Court. But it's a micro fraction of cases that make it to that level. A lot of cases can ask, but they don't always get there. So the Supreme Court today announced that they're going to hear the appeal on the Alston case. And just so people kind of understand, and then Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you because I know you know way more about this case than the average bear. Essentially, the NCAA lost at the lower court level, and they're bringing up an appeal, and they're basically trying to say what they're doing in terms of placing these limits on college athletes is not violative of antitrust law. So they don't have an antitrust exemption like Major League Baseball does. So we really have to dig into the antitrust law here. So Mike, why don't you give us a brief background on the Alston case and where it was left at the intermediary level that the Supreme Court is now going to weigh in?
Where it was left off was the Ninth Circuit. And for college athletes, the Ninth Circuit is, and for attorneys, for the legal sphere, the Ninth Circuit in California, well, it doesn't just house California, but mainly coming out of California. That's where you want to be. If you want to win an NCAA case, you go to the Ninth Circuit because Judge Wilkin will hear it in California, and you'll probably win because that's exactly what happened with O'Bannon, and that happened with Alston. Judge Wilkin, I would say, not to go too far, as she's an advocate for NCAA athletes, but if you read her opinions, you can see that the NCAA is just doesn't make any sense. So Dan was right. I read, it was a 104-page case that came out of the Ninth Circuit. I believe it was last spring, 2019. And basically what it was a number of NCAA men's and women's basketball players, as well as FBS football student athletes. And they were challenging the NCAA rules that limit compensation that they can receive in exchange for athletics. So that's the whole name, image, and likeness. It fit right into the sphere. O'Bannon was a little bit different because that was EA Sports and the video games. That was that case. So Alston was the student athletes. They were arguing that the limits violate federal antitrust law because, student athletes could get greater compensation in exchange for their athletic services, comparing themselves to pro athletes or whatnot. Basically, I think the biggest takeaway that I had from this case was Judge Wilkin was attacking the definitions that the NCAA was using, which I'm making a hand motion because it was they used circular definitions, is basically what she said. The NCAA is hiding behind this amateurism reasoning for not compensating student athletes, saying that because they're amateurs, they're not allowed to be paid. And then they define amateurs as student athletes who don't get paid. So how can you go on that reasoning alone? Just doesn't make any sense. And Judge Wilkin took issue with that reasoning, saying that you can't hide behind these circular definitions forever, and that a student athlete being paid makes them not an amateur, which makes them not eligible. She didn't understand their reasoning, and rightfully so. And that's really where she hit home with and why Alston ruled this way.
So for the people that maybe aren't, maybe 1Ls or that aren't really lawyers, Mike's referring to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. So this case was at the trial court level, then it got to the intermediary level. So the Supreme Court didn't have to by any means accept the case on appeal. The case could have ended there. And if it did, then maybe today would have been an even interesting day because they'd be held in violation of antitrust law as of today. But I think with the case of this magnitude, I think with all the federal attention that's being now paid to this issue of name, image, and likeness, I think reaches a very strong newsworthy level on the sports law landscape. We've spent, I don't know, maybe over a year at this point since California Fair Pay to Play came into play, no pun intended. But back in November of 2019, California said they wanted to pay student athletes, and then Florida passed their own laws and so on and so forth. So people have been asking for this, NCAA has been asking for antitrust exemption. States are passing this different legislation across the country. The NCAA is kind of trying up with their own payment bylaws. But at the end of the day, if the NCAA is violating antitrust law by even their current limits on student athletes, I don't even know if we need to jump through all these hoops, right? Like, I just don't think the NCAA is allowed to do what they're doing, even absent state law. I mean, is that how you view it, Mike?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like what was happening was they were just trying to put as much pressure on the NCAA as possible to finally just amend their bylaws to have it effectuate payment for athletes. And they weren't saying necessarily like, because you're playing athletics for our team, you get paid. It's just these other opportunities that arise. Like I think there is a new lawsuit coming out where these two student athletes have a big following on Instagram and advertisers want to pay them, but they can't get paid because that is in violation of the NCAA rules. So I definitely agree that there's just all of this pressure coming from a lot of different angles. Alston came down in the Ninth Circuit, the Court of Appeals, and that was one angle of pressure. And then it was being lifted on appeal. And then you had SB, 206 coming out of California that put even more pressure on the NCAA because that actually put a timestamp being like, okay, this has to happen by, I think it was January of 2021. So it's like, this is going to happen. Then Florida was like, well, we want to be first. And then there was the fight between different state legislatures because of the recruitment advantage, right? Like
yeah. So the one correction, California was 2023. Which was why,
sorry.
Yeah, no, but it's the moot point because now California is trying to move up to 2021. Right. So that's the date's not coming out of nowhere. So yeah, it's an interesting level. And I think, Mike, where this all kind of makes sense, we can all tie this together. And you phrased it really appropriately. They're putting all this immense pressure on the NCAA, and for better or for worse, I think we were all operating in a gray zone, right? Like what really is preventing the NCAA from paying their athletes. Well, the NCAA says they shouldn't, and they say it's violative of antitrust law. It's because NCAA is a private business at a certain level, but obviously they're run by state institutions. So what rules, right? Should the NCAA's rules take over, or should state laws take over? So that's why it's imperative that the states were kind of forcing the issue. Now the Supreme Court's forcing the issue. So, they're really getting it from all levels of government. I mean, the only branch of government remaining is the president to weigh in. And Donald Trump was basically there when he was trying to force college athletes back. So yeah, I think it's an interesting, really interesting look. I mean, yeah, I think you and I would be remiss if we made some type of prediction, but I think we probably should. I mean, I just think, Mike, when we see a case like this go to the Supreme Court, there's been so much talk about whether athletes should get paid. And if you just read the pulse of the country, it's one of these topics like we saw in California. That's a bipartisan issue. Republicans, Democrats, they believe that athletes should get paid. I don't think you'll find anybody in this country that'll just say college athletes should not make a dime. Maybe some people will disagree as to the extent. Like I believe it should be a true free market economy. I have no reason. Like if my daughter Dylan became like Mrs. Connecticut basketball and got recruited to UConn, like, well, why can't she make $1 million a year? Like I don't know why that would be an issue. But the thing that the NCAA has always rested their laurels on, or their justification on, they want college athletes to be treated differently than pro sport athletes. And I guess I kind of understand that, right? Because you don't want kids to grow up so fast. But, then it's almost a farce at a certain point, Mike, because we have players like, the late great Kobe Bryant, Kevin Garnett, LeBron James, who went straight from the high school to the pros, and they're fine, right? Like they were healthy with their funds. They made a lot of money. Then, even best case scenario for just the world that we live in, a lot of guys are one and done players. They play 1 year in college and then they go to the pros. So what is the NCAA really protecting with their high level athletes? So yeah, I don't really see the justification for that anymore. In the world that we live in, athletes are growing up so fast. They're already on social media. They're already kind of thrown to the wolves of the media and whatnot. It's not a world where I think we need to really protect our athletes. And I think that's, what at least I've been trying to harp on. That's essentially player empowerment making its way to college. If these guys want to make money, and they can make money, and, like Tim Tebow, not the best example because he's not really in favor of this, but he probably could have garnered $10 million a year. I think maybe I'm being conservative, in the state of Florida when he was, the god of Gainesville. By the way, we've said God now 3 times on this podcast. This is almost like when Dan was saying Damien over and over on that random.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Mike, I guess I'll pass it to you. What do you think are your predictions here, where this thing could go?
I've been saying when the name, image, likeness stuff started coming about, athletes were eventually going to get paid. It was going to happen. The only question was which way it was going to occur. And that's what we're talking about. The different angles that's coming out. Because then the NCAA said, okay, we can fight back. And they tried to make a federal bill. They got on Congress's side to write a bill so they could take the control over, because if there was a federal bill,
federal government, Supreme Court, it's literally almost every way that they're getting hit from this.
Right, exactly. And the reason that the NCAA went to Congress, because if they passed a bill, then that poo-pooed all of the state governments, whatever the state passed, because then that would be precedent. They would have to adhere to the federal bill. So, and you want to talk about Tim Tebow, you can go through the number of athletes that kind of went through, the first person I thought of was Jimmer. Think about how much money Jimmer could have made going out of BYU. And the thing about, you talk about players going directly into the pros, that just doesn't happen. I mean, it could have happened for Zion, but there's these rules in place that the NCAA and I think pro sports kind of work together, being like to make this one and done rule. For football, there's I think a 3-year rule. You have to be in college for 3 years, right? Before you can
3 years
go into
removed from high school, not necessarily, because you could be a sophomore redshirt player.
Oh, right. So the NCAA is acting as a minor league system for a lot of pro sports. Baseball is different because baseball actually has minor leagues. So why not go get 4 years education and then go into the minors? Because you're going to have to do that anyway. That was a whole Billy Bean issue, if you've ever seen Moneyball. Going to college,
have I ever seen Moneyball, Mike? Come on. I was like live tweeting Moneyball like a few months ago, but go ahead.
To me, this also hurts. It doesn't hurt pro sports, but it kind of, because I think you think about the NBA, they don't really have like the development league anymore, the G League, like you have what LaMelo did where he went to Europe and then that's how he got his experience, but that's only because he had a shoe because of his dad and he was violating NCAA rules and he couldn't play in college anymore. So it all kind of circles around these arbitrary NCAA rules because they think, what they say goes, which fair. If you want to play college sports, you have to abide by the rules, whatever. But this is just an issue where it's always been kind of in the back of everyone's mind where it's like college athletes are going to get paid. It's going to happen. And yeah, I think we're getting very close there, and just the pressure is building up now, and it's just going to happen.
The only thing, Mike, I'll push back and we'll move to the next one. I think there's a world which not enough people are talking about. If you were to pay college athletes, say $1 million a year, however you're going to do it, Mr. One and Done might feel inclined to stay in college for 4 years, right? Like let him get paid. So there's the scenario where you can have a better quality feeder system to the pros. So I think we don't have an incentive for college basketball players to stay 4 years. I guess college football players are more likely to stay to the senior, but we don't see it that often. So in any event, I just don't think we can assume that the players are going to leave for greener pastures quickly. Is always my only point there.
Maybe better. I can agree with that with Frank Kaminsky, because Frank Kaminsky actually played all 4 years. And then he went in and he was decent, but now he's not great in the NBA. But if you had Zion say all 4 years at Duke, I think that hurts the NBA. They make way more money with Zion in the league than out of the league.
I don't know, because let's put it this way. There were years where guys would stay 4 years, like Tim Duncan, right? He was a polished player when he came to the pros. He could dominate immediately. So I think the game, maybe we're somewhere in the middle, because you could be Trae Young and come into the pros and be fine, because the college game is now, just with shooting, is getting close to the pros. But you have so many players flame out at the back of the first round that come out early and aren't prepared for, I guess the money aspects, and they just kind of fall off. So, I have no issue with it personally, but that said, Mike, we'll transition to our third topic. So far we've hit basketball, I guess with college sports, it's somewhere in the middle, and then we're going to turn to some baseball. So Mike, I think, this is just me. So Mike is not saying this. I think the Redskins in a vacuum, if you say that name, there's a derogatory concept of that name. And that's basically what the USPTO office said several years back when they removed the federal trademark protection on the word Redskins, because they said it was so offensive in a vacuum. So that I get for Washington football team purposes. I get why there's so much controversy about the name. I get why South Park did an entire episode on it. And I get just saying the name Redskins is offensive. Like I get that. Now, when we had this topic in July, I remember, I went on a couple of radio shows and I was talking about it. The next teams that were in line was really anyone that had any Native American, imagery, because it's in the same vein. I don't know if they're as offensive or if they're offensive. I don't even want to say that they're offensive, but they're in the same vein. So the question was going to come up, be it the Kansas City Chiefs, the Atlanta Braves, the Cleveland Indians was an obvious one. I know people were bringing up the Edmonton Eskimos, a little bit different, but same concept. So
Illinois fighting
Illini, right? It's just the imagery. So I posted, now over the summer, but Kansas City Chiefs do a lot of, there's nothing really wrong with the word Chiefs, right? But they do a lot of Native American imagery. It's a lot of cultural appropriation. Sometimes that's okay, and other times it's not. There's a fine line you have to cross. So the Indians, they had Chief Wahoo as their logo for a long time. They've since removed it. They have a big C in their jersey. Chief Wahoo, speaking of Redskins, is an Indian with red skin. So I think here, what's happening with the Indians, we'll talk about with the news, but I think that the association between Chief Wahoo and the Indians are really bringing them down, because the Indians in a vacuum, the word Indians, I don't think anyone can have it's not an offensive term, like the Florida State Seminoles or the college football team of Florida State. It's an Indian type name, but I don't know if it's that offensive. I don't know if there's an issue just having that in a vacuum. So essentially what we have here this past week, the Cleveland Indians announced that they will not be playing, that the name change will come, that the Cleveland Indians has an expiration date. So the names that have been thrown out, Cleveland Spiders, which I guess was a former Major League Baseball team that had one of the worst winning percentages in all time, which I don't know why that would be in play, but I guess people are thinking about that for some reason. And the one that I think is so appropriate for 2020, we had the Washington football team, Mike, and of course the Cleveland baseball team is being brought up. So Mike, I turn it to you. What do you think about the overall name change? What do you think about the names that are being thrown out, and maybe some potential trademark issues that you're seeing in it?
It was an interesting point that you bring up about Chief Wahoo with the Redskins. I completely agree. I didn't really think about that. It was more the image. There was the fight before with the cartoonish character that was Chief Wahoo, and they thought that was inappropriate and it was offensive. And a lot of it that comes, besides just the trademark issue and the name being offensive, you have fans that show up to stadiums in their full headdress, red face, whatever. There's a whole other issue with that of, I guess that would be cultural appropriation to say the least. But now with the Indians going to the Cleveland baseball team, I don't know. That's just, especially think about the minor leagues, right? If you think about minor league teams that have some wacky names and just crazy mascots, baseball is just known for different things. Football was more of a traditional, like, this is the team. This is so, wrapped around the culture of this sport. So people were upset about losing the Redskins. So I've been a Redskins fan forever, and they hold true to the name. I don't know if that's the same with the Indians. I think they have more potential. Cleveland Spiders, that's weird. I don't like the Spiders aspect. Again, that's a
I'll say this. We had a lot of fun. We did maybe 3-4 episodes on Dan Snyder. The Washington football team, it's one of the dumbest names I've ever heard. It's just let's come up with a bunch of names, and probably someone goes, what is, let's just look at Washington football team. I'm let's just use that as a placeholder until we can think of a real name for the season. I can't believe that we go on my fantasy football site, it just says football team. It says football team 14 and whatever team 7. It's your name is football team. You are just so lacking in any creative genes that you have football team. So we joke that, and we're doing it kind of in jest, the Cleveland baseball team. I don't think they're going to do that because I don't think any ownership in sports is as inept to come up with such a horrendous name. But even if they wanted to come up with the Cleveland baseball team, they have found themselves in a situation with a potential, well, not even a potential, an actualized squatter. Somebody by the name of Georgia individual named Andrew Steen per Sportico applied for the trademark for Cleveland baseball team with intended use for entertainment, sports, and other services. Guess when he did it, Mike? This was right around the time we recorded our podcast, when the now infamous Martin McCauley of Virginia had taken out about 50 marks over the course of 4 years, like a psycho, for the Washington Redskins / Washington football team. So people are, Martin McCauley might go in the record books as some a pioneer in this sports trademark space.
He uses all of the trademarks in commerce in perfect. It's crazy. I mean, as soon as that happened, when everybody was talking about, so I bet you if you go to Kansas City, there's probably a Kansas City football team squatter as well. Somebody that trademarked that as well.
Maybe it's Andrew Steen. Maybe it's Martin McCauley. Maybe it's Mike Lawson, but keep going.
So everybody saw the potential funny aspect of trademarking different names that could potentially happen for a lot of these Native American culture around some of the Indians, the Chiefs, whatever. The biggest thing is this is necessary. I think they're going to come up with a team name. You're right. The Cleveland baseball team just sounds so silly. And so does the Washington football team. I mean, what is this, England rugby? We are the Cheshire Rugby Club, this is so different. In a professional sports arena with trademarks and branding and things like that, they couldn't come up with anything. I think it's just a little silly. So I think Cleveland will have something, whether it's, was there a bunch? Was it the Cleveland Spiders, Cleveland Buckeyes, if they're going to go with Ohio, but I don't think Ohio State would like that. I think there was Cleveland Guardians, Cleveland Defenders. There was a whole list of.
I'm not sure why you're not referencing the one that we talked about. Are you embarrassed to say this term?
The Cleveland Steamers.
People were talking about the Washington Jeffrey Epstein's. Okay, that was a name that people were actually having fun with.
Well, that's because Dan Snyder apparently was connected with Jeffrey Epstein.
Hold on. Allegedly. This podcast is not getting sued like the many people that Dan
allegedly.
Okay, Mike, let us transition to our fourth topic of the day. So we've talked about James Harden, we talked about college sports, we talked about baseball and Cleveland Indians, and now, Mike, we rarely get to talk about boxing. So a couple weeks back, I know you and I were having a lot of fun with this late at night on that, I think it was a Saturday, but the Mike Tyson-Roy Jones Jr. fight, everyone was all excited about that fight. And the undercard had a fight that maybe is now more memorable now looking back. That's the Nate Robinson-Jake Paul fight. So Nate Robinson, I know very well. He was a New York Knick for many years, won the slam dunk contest. He's a complete character. He was in, what was that movie with Shaq? What was that movie? I'm going to forget. Oh, Uncle Drew. He was a character.
It's Kyrie Irving.
It's Kyrie Irving.
It's Kyrie Irving's movie.
So Nate Robinson, who was in the Uncle Drew movie, he was Boots. He was like an old man. It was really cool. He gets KO'd from Jake Paul. And people are talking about that KO because the Tyson-Roy Jones Jr. fight, it was a little, the fix was in. They weren't going to hit each other in the face, all that fun stuff. So Jake Paul becomes the big winner from that debate. So we were all kind of speculating on who Jake Paul is going to fight next. And now people that maybe don't know Jake is famous from YouTube fame. I think him and his brother were a Vine fame before that. But Jake is really famous because his older brother Logan is famous. And Logan is also a boxer in his own right. Obviously had a very limited amount of professional fights. But what Logan Paul did was kind of capitalize on the moment. So Logan Paul has it. Who did he lose to, Mike? He lost to this guy, KSI?
KSI. He's a British YouTuber.
So when you lose to another YouTuber, like, what is that? Like, do you just have to like fade into oblivion? Like, what's the punishment?
Well, I don't know. I mean, YouTube boxing is the newest thing. I mean,
I'm kind of digging it right now. I'm kind of into it.
Well, here's the thing. Boxing definitely was on its way down. I mean, with Floyd going out, there's been a lot less coverage of boxing, and rightfully so. They've brought a lot of hype to it. YouTube is on a pretty high trajectory right now, and you've got these 20-something-year-old guys that are interested in training, and they're not going to lie. I did not want Jake Paul to beat Nate Robinson. I was really hoping that Nate Robinson could go into that ring with a little bit more than just some street fight jump at him tactics. But Jake Paul actually...
There's a spark plug in there.
He's kryptonite. I don't know. The biggest thing with like Logan and Jake have been training. They've been training for the last couple of years, and they look decent. I don't want to say they're good fighters, but they've been training, and they know a little bit what they're doing in the ring. It makes it a little more exciting.
Mike, and you brought this topic up, so I want to give you all the credit where it's due. The reason we bring this up, Logan Paul following the Jake Paul fight, right? And Jake Paul, sorry to Mike, Jake Paul was victorious. He got a KO. I think it was round 2. Essentially what we have is a situation where Jake Paul is now a very marketable man that can sell a fight, whether he's going to be the undercard or main card. He can sell a fight. So Mike Tyson is now going to have a rematch with Evander Holyfield. They're going to have a lot of these fights in the near future. So Jake Paul is trying to figure out his next fight. We'll talk about this. He was trying to entice Conor McGregor. And all of a sudden, the other Paul brother, Logan Paul, with a loss to his name, lands the biggest fight that anybody could possibly imagine for a YouTuber with the best boxer of all time. If you just, I don't think I'm saying anything so controversial, and that's Floyd Mayweather. So Floyd Mayweather has agreed when Nate fought Jake Paul, it was a real sanctioned professional boxing match. The Floyd Logan fight is going to be an exhibition. So that's closer to what we saw with Tyson and Roy Jones Jr. So Mike, let me toss it to you because this is the fun conversation you and I had offline. But we are in a world where the money is really insane for YouTube celebrity boxers. So I know you dug into this a little bit. What are you hearing and what are you reading on the terms of the Floyd Mayweather fight? And then separately, what's being talked about for potential McGregor purse and what numbers are being floated out?
I don't even know where this fight came out of. It was, I mean, you have Jake Paul getting all of this press coverage with what was going on with the Tyson fight and getting a lot of, I don't even know. I mean, I wasn't expecting Nate Robinson to win, so it's whatever. I think I was more excited to see Mike Tyson because I didn't grow up watching Mike Tyson. So that happens. And then all of a sudden we see that now I believe it's February 20th of 2021. Yeah. We have Logan Paul fighting Floyd Mayweather. This blew my mind.
But maybe Jake, because Jake is now a big name. Logan Paul has not had that equivalent of a boxing match on that type of a card.
You're correct. But here's the thing we were just talking about, right? You asked about YouTube boxers fighting YouTube boxers. That's pretty much all it's been, right? These younger, inexperienced boxers just fighting for YouTube views. And then they started calling out actual fighters. They actually wanted to fight, trained killers, if you will, that could do some serious damage to them. And Logan, there's a possibility that Jake Paul probably helped, but I think Logan has been marketing himself and trying to get into the actual boxing world, and he just took this route instead. But I wholeheartedly believe that he had already had contact with the Mayweather crew, his management, whatever, to try to set up some fight. I don't know if it's public. I saw it on social media. You're talking about money. That's the biggest thing. I think up front, Floyd Mayweather is going to be guaranteed $5 million, and then he gets, I think, 50% of the pay-per-view, and then Logan Paul gets something like $250,000 to $275,000 up front, and he'll get 5% of the pay-per-view. So Logan's not that's a lot of money. Don't get me wrong, like that's money, but Logan's not necessarily doing it for the money, but he's definitely doing it for the fame, the growth that he's going to have. But Logan comes in, he's got 22.6 million followers on YouTube. That's a lot. I mean, that's for YouTube, that's a really good amount. Logan got infamous from some negative things that he's done in his past, but he's really taken to this boxing world and he's gone full force. You're right. Jake Paul definitely probably helped because Mayweather finally saw, he's like, oh, like a YouTube boxer actually can bring in views. And he's like, that happened with Tyson. And I imagine Mayweather has a big ego. He's like, I can bring in more views than Tyson. So he's like, why don't I do it? And he's got nothing to lose. It's an exhibition.
Hold on. He's got a lot to lose, Mike. You and I were just talking about him as being the greatest boxer of all time. It doesn't matter, right, if it's an exhibition or not. If he loses to Logan Paul, right, and I looked at the pictures. I mean, you just look at Jake and Nate Robinson. Jake is much bigger than Nate Robinson. So, and obviously, neither of them are really like professional boxers, but whatever. You look at Logan next to Floyd, you know, Logan's much bigger. So, I mean, it's not like unheard of, but obviously Floyd is the best boxer of all time. He's not going to get in the ring with someone like that. I know you and I have joked, like there was a wrestling event, WWE event way back when the Big Show fought Floyd Mayweather. So, you know, Big Show has actually got a decent Netflix show. I don't know if you've checked that out recently.
No, I have not.
I'm a wealth of knowledge when it comes to shows. So you did point out one thing, which I did want to touch on. So, you know, I guess the long and short of the money, there's a lot of money being talked about, right? And we didn't necessarily bring it up, but like there's 50 million potentially being on the table for Conor McGregor for this Jake Paul fight. Logan Paul fight, you know, it's 5 million, I guess, is the number that's being talked about upfront for Floyd, and then like six figure, it's like a $200,000 payment for Logan Paul. I mean, Mike, I first heard about Logan Paul when I had never heard of him before. I mean, I understood YouTubers were a thing. The man took a video of a dead body in the suicide forest. Like, that's not just like like an infamous, like this is someone that in the recent history of YouTube was like a complete, like untouchable. He would lost all of his sponsorships. There were followers. Parents weren't allowing people to watch Logan Paul. And I remember I'm like, oh, he's got a brother. It's interesting. Jake Paul, I guess, like, well, that's the end. We heard of Logan Paul. His career's over. So he goes from that on the edge of relevance, right? Like being relevant for the wrong reasons, to now he's fighting Floyd Mayweather. And mind you, Mike, he's fighting Floyd Mayweather because his brother beat Nate Robinson, who was an absolute nobody and has never had a professional boxing match in his life. The roller coaster of Logan Paul's career will go down in history. And these guys are now just like rolling in the cash for these crazy fights. I mean, it just, I don't know. I'm on the one hand, you know, shocked and appalled. On the other hand, I'm just really impressed that they just conjured up this market out of nowhere. And they've been, I knew that they were in the boxing space for a number of years. And now all of a sudden, this is where you want to be, in the celebrity boxing arena. I remember years ago, like Dustin Diamond, Screech, like fought someone on Celebrity Boxing from Saved by the Bell. And he got like I think Tanya Harding was on the show. Like that was just a joke show for like, you know, for a one-time deal, which made no money. This is like a legitimate event. So I don't know. I mean, I give my hat off to the entrepreneurs behind what they're doing.
No, you're definitely right. And Logan has an incredible roller coaster of what's happening. And
I know that you're a Logan Paul fan, so I'm sorry I had to bring that up. I know he's like your idol in life, but I feel like I had to tell our listeners his real story.
No, completely the opposite.
You were just listening to his podcast, Mike. So I mean, like
only because I wanted to see what he had
only
to say
for research
about his brother. Only for research. That's right. I'm research based. No, I have to push back about the Jake. The only reason Floyd did it was because of Jake Paul. I think it helps, but I'm not 100% sold on that. But you're right. Logan Paul has gone through, I don't even know, up and down more than anybody, but they're bringing in money. And that's what Floyd wants. It's Floyd money Mayweather. That's you put a check in front of him, which brings me to what's happening with Conor McGregor. Jake Paul is calling out Conor McGregor in a very Conor McGregor-esque way, right? When McGregor was fighting Khabib, he went after his wife. I think he called his wife a towel. He like commented on a picture of their like marriage, and in their culture, the wife's face could not be shown. And McGregor was like, bro, your wife's a towel. Like McGregor went after his father, his family, his religion. McGregor does this too. McGregor's the villain of the UFC. So Jake Paul, in a very McGregor-esque way, posts a video, smoking a cigar, drinking whiskey, with an Irish flag draped around him, calls out McGregor. That's got to get McGregor's attention. And then he's got a $50 million check sitting next to his Lamborghini. Like, I don't know how much more. Mind you, Conor McGregor also just bought a Lamborghini yacht. The Lamborghini just made like a certain number of yachts, and Conor McGregor bought one. So like,
unbeknownst to me, I've never heard of that.
McGregor knows a good Lamborghini. Regardless, $50 million. I don't know where this money is coming from. You're talking about marketing, like what the Paul brothers are doing. And I only watched Impulsive, which is a pretty big podcast. They get a good amount of views.
But this was only the first time you've ever listened to it. Okay, go ahead.
First time I've ever listened to it, besides clips of random
okay,
guests.
Okay, James Harden. Continue.
So Logan was saying to Jake, like, you can't fight Conor McGregor because he'll actually kill you. Like, he's a legitimate, like, killer that, like, if he sees you in the street, he'll kill you. But then he's turning around and he's fighting Mayweather, who's the greatest boxer of all time. And you're right. Logan is, I think, 6'2", 200, and Mayweather is 5'8", maybe 150, but Mayweather's a defensive boxer, so he won't even allow Logan to touch him if he has his way. I mean, that's exactly what happened with McGregor. McGregor had a much greater reach in that fight, and he held his own a little bit, but McGregor couldn't do anything really because he's not the best boxer of all time. But now Jake is taunting McGregor. He only follows McGregor's fiance on Instagram. Then he goes after Dylan Dennis, throwing water balloons and toilet paper, who's another UFC fighter who's kind of in lines with McGregor, cussing at him, takes a screenshot of the toilet paper hitting him in the face, posting it as his picture on Instagram, and then following Dylan Dennis's girlfriend. So now he's...
Can we just, like, because I want to like make sure people understand, like, the hilarity in this. And, for everyone that follows, Mike and I Mike, obviously, we should mention, runs the Conic Detrimental account. We have a lot of fun with wrestling stuff. What Jake Paul is doing is ultimate heel wrestling maneuvers. And I want to point out, because Mike and I were talking about this last night, like, if you go to Logan or Jake Paul's Instagram account, he's following two people, right? Mike, tell me if I'm wrong. He's following Dylan Dennis and Dylan Dennis's girlfriend.
No, Dylan Dennis's girlfriend and Conor McGregor's fiance.
Okay, so he's following Dylan Dennis's girlfriend and Conor McGregor's fiance, and his picture is no longer himself. It is a picture of Dylan Dennis getting hit in the face with toilet paper that he was throwing in the viral video. Do I have all that right? That's correct. Yes. This is ultimate heel maneuver, and guess what? Guess what's sitting at the edge of this? Conor McGregor, who separately, and we've talked about why Conor's a big heel. Conor is the ultimate promoter. And not so long ago, Conor was promoting this ultimate fight, the crossover between two worlds, Floyd Mayweather versus Conor McGregor, which I watched. I bought the pay-per-view, which I never do. And it was a spectacle. I don't really know if it was a good fight. Mayweather let him hang around for a little bit, but those guys made a ton of money. And that's Conor's real world at this point. He hasn't really gone full force back into the UFC because he's kind of said to himself, hey, I can make boxing money, which for no apparent reason is much more than UFC money. I don't know. It's an interesting world that we've fallen into, Mike.
Well, just one thing, as we currently sit, like you said, it's Wednesday, December 16th. McGregor has not responded. McGregor has not said anything. The only person that has responded is Dana White, who, quote unquote, owns McGregor, right? He makes the fights for UFC. He's the one who has to approve everything. And he said there's zero chance. He said this before, and he said it again. There's zero chance that Jake Paul fights Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor is about to fight Dustin Poirier coming, I don't know exactly the date. So he's got other fights that he's worried about. But it's very interesting. And you bring up the Mayweather fight that McGregor did, but you got to think about Khabib. Remember when he threw the chair at Khabib's bus and he cracked the window or the ladder or whatever he threw? Like I said, Jake Paul is doing exactly what. It was like a dolly. It was like a little. Yeah. So if you want to talk about marketing, you might think that this is stupid, which it looks very stupid. It's exactly what McGregor has done in the past. So it's very funny, and I think Jake he's got the views. He's got 20 million followers on YouTube as well. He's got the people that are behind him that he can get enough people behind this. Basically, it was just kind of here's everything, balls in your court, Dana White and Conor McGregor. But Dana White's not happy. Also, mind you, just a little tidbit, he also called Dana White the Alaskan bullworm, which if you're a SpongeBob fan, I think that's hilarious.
The Alaskan bullworm. I'm going to have to look that up. You got me. I know who Pinhead Larry is, and I know who Miss Puff is. But the Alaskan bullworm.
If you are listening to this right now, just look up Dana White Alaskan bullworm. You'll have a lot of fun.
He does look like the Alaskan bullworm. Oh, okay then. Okay, so on that note, I think that's a good place to end that fourth topic. There's obviously a lot of good material in there, and we go into depth on the Paul brothers topic. Obviously, Mike and I are insinuating that this is not the last you're going to hear of celebrity boxing, and I gather there have been very little notes, legal scholarship written on the legal and the negotiation tactics behind celebrity boxing, and maybe there's some ethical issues too, whether you can have an exhibition fight. I know I placed money on the Tyson Roy Jones Jr. fight, which was I didn't mention on the podcast, but I had bet on who will bleed first, which I thought was an interesting prop to bet on, and that bet was actually canceled. Canceled means it was nullified because it came out that was an exhibition. I guess one of the stipulations was that they were not going to fight as hard. So interesting, just something to be mindful of, especially as sports betting continues to get legalization across the country. Okay, so fifth topic, Mike. I think this is near and dear to Dan's heart. So maybe we'll do a follow up next week to the extent there's something new that comes up. Mark Messier was my sports hero. That was the first memories I had as a young 6-year-old back in 1994 when the Rangers won the Cup. Mark Messier was the captain of that team, played for the Edmonton Oilers for a number of years, won some Stanley Cups there, came to New York, guaranteed a victory for the New Jersey Devils. They went to the Stanley Cup, they beat the Vancouver Canucks. So Mark Messier is born in Canada. He's a Canadian hockey player. But he's really a legend in New York. So where this kind of comes to a head, Mark Messier has now filed a lawsuit in New York State Court with a very famous firm that everyone, it's in law school, have heard of. That's Paul Weiss. He is suing an individual named Ed Mraz, suing him individually because of his capacity as the CEO of an Alberta cannabis company called Destiny Bioscience. So here's the gist of the lawsuit. Messier is from Canada, and he made this deal essentially that he was going to pay $500,000 into this cannabis company, be their spokesperson. And what this guy, Ed Mraz, I guess, did behind the scenes, he used Messier. He said, hey, Messier is associated with our product. And the guy was able to raise millions behind the scenes. So Messier is claiming in this new complaint filed, it's for breach of contract, and it's for breach of the implied covenant of good faith. But essentially, he's saying that this guy, Mraz, made a personal guarantee to him that regardless of how the company did, that he was at least going to get back his $500,000 investment. I think he said the greater of $750,000 or the share of stocks in the company. So if the share of stocks in the company went to $5 million, he'd get either $5 million or he'd get $750,000 in whatever the greater of the two was. Problem is the company's now worth zero, right? They're what's called a receivership. There's apparently bankruptcy. They're on the verge of some Chapter 11 type things, whatever the equivalent is in Canada. So Messier is basically suing and said, hey, I don't really care what this company's doing. There's no corporate veil that we're worried about here. I don't need to show fraud. I don't need to show self-dealing. You have a personal guarantee. I don't need to go through any of those hoops. All I need to show for purposes of personal guarantee, which you learn in contract law, is consideration. And here's the consideration. Here's the receipt. I gave you $500,000. That's the consideration. And you used that consideration to get all this other money sponsorships that come in. So yeah, I'm going to turn it to you. There's some fun stuff, obviously, in the complaint, which I'm happy to, to share. It's publicly available online. But where Messier is one of the most prominent celebrities in all of New York, and his stature as a international hockey superstar obviously brought in a lot of money for the company. So Mike, let me toss it to you. What are your thoughts overall on this lawsuit and Messier's chances of success from as far as you've seen?
I just want to start off with probably the best subtweet I saw in this whole situation, which is just 3 words. What a mess. I think that just sums it up like completely. I think it's hilarious. Great pun. But
what a Messier, right? How could this get?
What a Messier, right? Exactly.
How about this, Mike? How could this get?
Messier.
Messier.
So Messier is a very brazen guy. He considers himself to be one of the greatest hockey players of all time. He's got the hardware to back it up. He's got 6 Stanley Cups. I mean, he's definitely one of the best Rangers of all time. I'd have to hear Dan Wallach's take on this, but yeah, you go through and you read this complaint, it's a lot of guarantees that he was not going to lose money, or that he was at least going to get the investment that he had back. And he was signed up, and Messier, I think, said he was supposed to be their goodwill ambassador. And he was going to be, helping grow the business and build relationships with potential partners of this Destiny corporation here. And I think they had a lot of investment backing. I didn't see the final numbers of it, but it was upwards of $30 million. I think they had a lot of investment backing to start. And Messier was given the personal guarantee that he wouldn't lose money after, I think, his own holding company, Mar Lion USA, bought 400,000 shares of Destiny at like $1.25 a piece. He said, you're not going to lose, at least you're not going to lose the money that you put in. And again, another personal guarantee that he had that just fell through. Messier basically said that this guy Morose represented the investment was a sure thing, and that Messier couldn't lose any money on it. It was, when I was reading this, I was thinking of like Michael Scott in The Office. Like it's the best thing, and it's the scene where Jim, he's trying to do a Ponzi scheme, pyramid scheme, and he draws it. That was what I was thinking of. Just a side note.
And he draws. I know the episode. He draws it.
Yeah, he draws.
He goes like, these guys at the bottom, the top guys. Yeah.
Right. This guy got me and him, and then we have to get three guys. And then Jim draws the triangle. So it seems like there's just a lot of personal guarantees and a lot of. I think there's a quote I wanted to say. That Messier had that was pretty good. Messier goes, Destiny was not a sure thing, quite the opposite. It was a worthless company propped up by nothing more than Morose's grandiose promises. I think that sums it up pretty well. It's interesting, and it's interesting around Messier's image and just who he is. And then I think it's just funny that this is also a cannabis company. I think they went in May of 2020, they were $42 million in debt. So problematic. So I guess twofold, and this is kind of where the big, Messier and we should probably mention Messier, who have never, people that maybe are too young to know the name, it's spelled Messier. So that's me and Mike joking about what a mess and being Messier. So, just on that sense, if you're from New York and you don't know the spelling of Mark Messier, maybe you ain't from New York, but yeah. So I think what we should just, the bigger takeaways, right? We're going to have another world, and I'm sure in the years to come, assuming the podcast is going, which I have a feeling we'll be hanging around then. I think the world of cannabis and sports is going to have even further intersections. So the question that is fair to ask are whether this is going to maybe disincentivize athletes from getting involved in cannabis companies. So on that level, right? This, I can't think so, right? For years, whether it's been cannabis, whether it's been a car wash, whether it's been any number of schemes, players have invested their millions. And there's a documentary on ESPN, a great 30 for 30 called Broke. Players invest in all sorts of things. Usually it's not retired players. Usually it's young players that don't really know what to do with their money, but they're going to go broke in any number of facets. So do I think that Messier looks any dumber for investing in a weed company? No. Do I think Messier looks any dumber for investing in a company that went broke? No. If you want to know why, and this is the second part of the question, Messier got a personal guarantee from the CEO of the company, which is not that typical. If you're going to be really smart, if you're Ed Miraz, and I should mention, we just have a complaint at this point. We don't have any answer. I think it was filed on November 18th. So must have been some type of extension of time to answer, or else they would have taken a default, but nothing has been filed. But, normally for anyone that's taken corporations, you have to take it for the bar. So everyone kind of understands this. If you were a company, there's something called the corporate form. So let's say Mike and I created Conduct, or Mike and I created Conduct Detrimental Inc. And we signed some type of deal with Mark Messier to be the spokesperson for Conduct Detrimental. Mark, if you're listening, you can make this happen, okay? And you can have a personal guarantee from me. It's totally fine. But, if anything went wrong with the company and some deal fell through, Mark could sue Conduct Detrimental Inc., but we would be shielded by the corporate form. So unless he could really show that there was some type of fraud involved, or some type of self-dealing, or some type of you abusing the corporate form solely for its defense of the corporate, of this, something called the corporate veil, you're not going to get around that. Now, what Messier did in the situation was basically go to the CEO, listen, this is a hypothetical conversation, but he said, listen, I'm pretty well versed. I'm studying for the New York bar exam. People say I'm the most famous hockey player in New York history. I'm going to be the most famous lawyer in New York State history. I know corporation law and I know the corporate form. So I want you to send me a personal guarantee. So if I sue you, I don't have to jump through those hoops. You're just going to have to owe me that 500 grand, 700 grand, whatever it is. So this personal guarantee, I think if anything, Mike, it's going to be a lesson for CEOs of fledgling companies. If you want to pay the guy 500 grand to be your sponsor, that's fine. But to ask Mark Messier to pay 500,000 and to be your sponsor, if it goes wrong, it's going to go really wrong, because people are going to side with Mark Messier, especially in a forum like New York. We spent so much time on this podcast talking about the Kobe Bryant litigation, where Kobe was suing, or Kobe's wife was suing in Los Angeles Superior Court. Mark Messier suing in New York State Court is like, it's not home court advantage, Mike. It's home ice advantage, right? And we're in New York. I know it's snowing by me
over here. Do you get snow up by you, upstate?
No, I'm in Albany right now. Yeah, it's snowing here.
Yeah, I think this is a lawsuit where Messier is designed to win. He's got maybe the most famous firm in New York City with Paul Weiss. So setting up pretty well for Messier. Do you see any shot that Miraz has of defending this one?
So far, just on its face, it definitely looks good for Messier. I mean, side note about piercing the corporate veil, for any law students who haven't taken business associations or tax, I think they get into it in like tax 1 or tax 2. Piercing the corporate veil is very confusing, and there's a lot of hoops to jump through. So the fact that Messier has this, where he has literally nothing, he just basically steps out onto the ice and checks Miraz right into the boards. Like I don't see anything else happening here.
It's interesting. So if we'll keep an eye on them. It's going to be one. I know Dan's going to want to bring it up in the next podcast. So that said, we'll put this one in the books. I do want to give a quick shout out. We had some news this week. We didn't cover it. I want to save it for Dan next week. Dan, for those OG listeners of Conduct Detrimental, prior to me joining the show, Dan spent a lot of time talking about the NFL benefits in the CBA, an issue where NFL players, retired players, were getting kind of screwed over by the new CBA. So, I'm not going to bury the lead, but there was a very big announcement this week, which I think Dan can get a little bit of credit for shedding a light on. The NFL essentially agreed to push back any type of detriment for benefits that were supposed to be owed to older NFL players. And for my law firm, we got a couple of calls this week from different NFL players trying to see how they could take advantage of this change in the law, this change in stance of the CBA. So that said, Mike, pleasure having you on. I'm sure, if this was like, if we actually lived near each other, we could do like an around the horn type deal. Like we could just have people buzzing around. But Mike, excellent job passing the bar. Number one, excellent job on the podcast. I don't know, Mike, you have anything to say to people who are out there that passed the bar?
Yeah, and big congrats to everybody who took the bar. For those who found out they didn't pass, this was such an unprecedented time that it was so difficult. I mean, I was so nervous after I took it as well. It's a difficult test, and a lot of people don't pass the first time, and you're just gonna double down and you will pass the second time. So again, big congrats, and it's only up from here. That's what I should say.
Finally, I know we didn't talk about this as being a topic, but in the past couple months, we've started to get a nice uptick in listeners. We're up to a couple hundred that we get per episode now. So we love to hear it. We love the feedback that we get on Twitter, Instagram, and elsewhere. I know a couple people dropped me notes to say that we were in their top 10 listens on Spotify. The one thing that we, I'd love if we could get more of, it would help continue to grow the podcast, or reviews on iTunes. We got one a couple weeks back when I wanted to shout out. Again, I have no idea who this is. Hot Natalie. I don't know if this person's name is actually Natalie, but really love the feedback we're getting. So Hot Natalie writes, love the angles and discussions. Even if you were not into sport or legal stuff around it, listening to this podcast will make your day. You get smart ideas, unique points of view, and better understanding of hot subjects that everyone's talking about. See, Hot Natalie, she knows what hot subjects are about. She's just knows. So yeah, we'd love, in addition to telling us on DMs and on you guys know, I love hearing it. I always respond to everything. It'd be great to get that also just on the iTunes reviews, and we're happy to shout it out. If you have a cool name like Hot Natalie, I'm happy to shout it out. Yeah, Mike, anything to add before we wrap this up?
Definitely DM the podcast account too, because I am on it all the time. I get notifications. You want a response back?
I'll sign off. As always, myself, Dan Lust. I'm on Twitter, Instagram at SportsLawLust. Dan Wallach, who will be rejoining us next week at Wallach Legal. Mike.
So my handle is Mike_son_of_law. Just a little play on words because my last name is Lawson. And the podcast is at Con Detrimental.
For Mike, myself, Dan, we will see you next week, team. And maybe Mike will have a new Instagram handle, maybe at Mike Lawson ESQ, because he's now a lawyer. And we will see you next week, guys, on another episode of Conduct Detrimental. See you then.